Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive. You know those emotional traps that always seem to trip us up
Yeah.
and keep us stuck in these, negative patterns?
Hmm.
We're gonna really dig deep into why they happen
Right.
and how to break free from them once and for all.
Absolutely.
We've got this awesome source. It's called How to Break Free from Emotional Traps
Okay.
from the Inner Balance Red Print. So it's
Interesting.
yeah, it's like having a personal coach, right there in your pocket.
Nice.
So let's jump right into it. What exactly are emotional traps?
Well, they're kind of like psychological quicksand.
Oh, okay.
They might feel, familiar and even comfortable at first, but the longer you stay stuck,
Yeah.
the harder it is to move forward.
It's like that feeling when you hit the snooze button way too many times.
Right.
It feels good in the moment,
Yeah,
but you end up being late for everything.
exactly. And there are a few common traps I think we all tend to fall into.
Okay.
Overthinking is a big one.
Yeah.
Just endlessly replaying a conversation in your head and like dissecting every word, every gesture.
Tell me about it. Sometimes I catch myself overthinking.
Right?
Like, even the smallest interactions, it can be exhausting.
Oh, it definitely can.
Yeah.
And it's often fueled by this deeper fear, you
What
know?
kind of fear?
The fear of making the wrong choice or saying the wrong thing.
So it's not just the thoughts themselves, it's the emotions behind them.
Yeah, exactly.
That's interesting. What about that, self-criticism?
Self-criticism, oh, that can be brutal.
That inner voice can be so mean.
It really can.
Yeah.
And, it often stems from this need for control.
Okay.
We try to protect ourselves from hurt or failure
Yep.
by just constantly pointing out our flaws.
So it's like we're trying to beat everyone to the punch.
Exactly. It's like preempting any external criticism by being our own harshest critic.
That makes a lot of sense. But it probably ends up doing more harm than good, right?
Absolutely. And then there's avoidance, the king or queen of procrastination.
Avoidance. Yeah.
It's so tempting to just dodge those uncomfortable feelings or situations.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But ultimately, it just creates this backlog of anxiety and stress.
Oh, avoidance is totally my go-to, especially when it comes to tasks that just feel super overwhelming.
Yeah.
I put them off until the very last minute, which makes them even worse.
It's like a snowball effect.
Yeah.
And that's where understanding the why behind the avoidance can be so helpful.
Okay, so how do we do that?
You got to ask yourself, what is it about that specific task that feels so overwhelming?
Okay.
Is it fear of failure, maybe a lack of confidence, or do you feel like you just don't have the resources you need?
So instead of beating ourselves up for procrastinating, we should try to figure out what's really going on.
Exactly.
I like that. Okay, so we know what emotional traps are, but how do we actually recognize them in our own lives?
That's a great question.
Mhm.
And our source material actually outlines a few key indicators.
Okay, so what are we looking for?
First, do you find yourself stuck in these recurring negative patterns?
Mm.
The same thoughts, the same arguments, the same conflicts, just playing on repeat.
It's like being stuck in a broken record.
Exactly. Except the song is anxiety and frustration.
Yeah, not a good song.
Not at all. Another red flag is excessive self-criticism.
Okay.
Are you constantly focusing on your flaws, minimizing your accomplishments,
Mm-hmm.
holding yourself to these unrealistically high standards?
I'm definitely guilty of that sometimes. It's so easy to get caught up in what we haven't done yet.
Right. And then there are avoidance behaviors.
Yeah.
Are you constantly putting things off, making excuses?
Yep.
Finding ways to distract yourself from facing those difficult emotions?
Oh, yeah. Avoidance is my comfort zone, even though I know it's not good for me.
We all have our comfort zones.
Mm-hmm.
Another sign to watch out for is disproportionate emotional reactions.
Okay, what does that mean?
Are you finding that small triggers lead to these outsized anger, sadness, or frustration?
It's like getting super worked up over something
Mhm.
tiny.
Exactly. And in that moment, it feels like the end of the world.
Yeah, I've been there. And lastly, do you just have this overall feeling of being stuck?
Yeah, like you're spinning your wheels but not getting anywhere.
It's like running on a treadmill.
Exactly. You're putting in
Yeah.
all this effort, but you're not making any progress.
Okay, so if any of these signs sound familiar, it might mean we're caught in an emotional trap.
Exactly.
So now that we understand what these traps are and how to recognize them, I think it's time to shift our focus to you, the listener.
Okay, sounds good.
How can you break free from these patterns and really reclaim your emotional well-being?
That's the million-dollar question.
That's what we'll be exploring in part 2 of our deep dive.
Yeah, wait.
All right, so we're back, and we just talked about all those sneaky emotional traps
Right.
and how to know if we're stuck in one. But knowing is only half the battle, right?
Absolutely. It's like knowing you're in quicksand but not knowing how to get out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how do we actually break free?
Well, our source, How to Break Free from Emotional Traps, has some really great advice.
Okay, so what's the first step?
It all starts with like shifting your mindset,
Hmm,
developing some healthier coping mechanisms.
that makes sense, but it also sounds kind of hard.
It can be, but it starts with acknowledging your emotions.
So not just trying to like force myself to be happy.
Right. Not just putting on a happy face.
Yeah.
You got to actually lean into those uncomfortable feelings.
So like sit with them even if they're icky.
Exactly. Create space for them, even the unpleasant ones.
Okay, and how do we do that?
Journaling can be super helpful.
Oh yeah, I love journaling.
Or just talking to a trusted friend can give you that safe space to process what's going on.
So instead of letting those emotions bottle up, we're actually dealing with them.
Exactly. You're processing them, learning from them.
Okay, so we've acknowledged our emotions. What's next?
Now you got to identify the trigger.
Okay.
Like what specific situations or people tend to pull you into that trap.
So it's like detective work.
Exactly. You got to figure out what sets off those negative patterns.
Let's say I realize public speaking always makes me super self-critical.
Okay, that's a great example. So now you know the trigger is public speaking.
Right.
So you can start to prepare for it differently.
So instead of just avoiding it completely, I need to change how I react to it,
That's the key. And that leads us to the next step,
which is,
challenging those negative beliefs.
okay, so those thoughts that are always running through my head.
Exactly. You got to ask yourself, is this thought really true? Am I being fair to myself?
It's like putting those thoughts on trial.
Exactly.
Oh.
So if you're thinking, I'm going to mess this up,
Mhm.
challenge it with evidence. Have you prepared thoroughly? Have you given good presentations in the past?
It's amazing how often those negative thoughts aren't even true.
That's right. And once you start challenging them,
Yeah.
you can start to reframe them into more neutral or even positive statements.
So instead of, I'm going to mess up, I could say, I've got this.
Or I'm well prepared, I'm going to do my best.
Yeah, that feels so much better.
Exactly. And remember, this is an ongoing practice.
Okay.
It's not about being positive all the time.
I was going to say that sounds exhausting.
Right. It's about developing a more compassionate and balanced inner voice.
I like that. So we've talked about acknowledging our emotions,
Right.
identifying those triggers, and challenging those pesky negative beliefs.
Mhm.
What else can we do?
Our source also talks about mindfulness techniques.
Okay, like meditation.
Yeah, meditation, deep breathing, those can help you stay present
Right.
and avoid getting swept away by those intense emotions.
I've always struggled with mindfulness.
It takes practice.
Yeah.
It's like hitting the pause button before you react to a trigger.
So I can choose how I want to respond.
Exactly. And there's so many different techniques to try.
Like what?
You could do body scan meditation to notice those physical sensations,
Okay.
or a loving kindness meditation to cultivate more compassion.
It's about finding what works for me.
Exactly. What about setting boundaries?
Oh, boundaries.
Yeah.
That's a tough one.
It's crucial, though. You got to learn to say no.
But what if it's my boss asking me to do more work?
I get it. But remember, boundaries don't have to be mean.
Wow.
You can say, I'd love to, but I'm swamped right now.
Right.
Or maybe I can help next week.
So I can still be respectful.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the more you practice, the easier it gets.
We've covered so much ground already. All this stuff is really helpful.
It is, and there's even more.
Okay, so we've learned so much about how to spot these emotional traps,
Mhm.
and we've got all these great tools to, like, break free.
Right.
But sometimes it feels like those traps are just so strong.
Yeah, it's true. Those old habits die hard.
Exactly. And even when we have all the right tools,
Yeah,
we might still need a little extra help.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's where professional help can be a game changer.
It's like having a guide to help you navigate that tough emotional stuff.
Exactly. They can give you personalized strategies and support, based on your specific needs.
And there's no shame in asking for help, right?
None at all. It shows you're committed to your well-being.
Exactly. Okay, so before we wrap up, I want to make sure we give you some practical tips.
Yeah, let's do it.
Stuff you can use right now.
Remember those common traps we talked about? Overthinking, self-criticism, avoidance?
Yeah.
Our source has some awesome real-life examples for breaking free.
Perfect. So let's start with overthinking. What happens when those thoughts just won't stop?
Okay, so our source suggests setting a timer.
A timer.
Yeah, like for 10 minutes.
Okay.
Give yourself that time to worry and process, but when the timer goes off,
Yeah.
you shift your focus to something else.
So it's like a worry window.
Exactly. It's about setting boundaries for your worry.
Oh.
And then choose an activity that really engages you.
Okay, so something I enjoy.
Yeah, maybe going for a walk, listening to music, working on a creative project.
Love that. Okay, now what about self-criticism? You know, that inner critic that's always so mean.
For self-criticism, try writing down 3 things you accomplished each day.
Three things.
Yeah, no matter how small they seem.
Oh, that's a good idea. It's so easy to focus on what we haven't done.
Right, but this helps you focus on the positive.
It's like celebrating those small wins.
Exactly.
Mm.
And last but not least, avoidance. Any tips for tackling that one? For avoidance, the key is to break down big tasks into smaller steps.
Hmm.
Focus on just one step at a time.
It's like that saying, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step.
Exactly. So instead of looking at the whole mountain, just focus on putting on your hiking boots.
I love that analogy. Okay, so we've got all these great strategies. What's the key takeaway here for our listeners?
I'd say recognizing emotional traps is like the first step to freedom.
Yes.
You've got the tools to break free.
And you don't have to do it alone.
Exactly. Reach out to a friend, a therapist, or anyone who supports you.
And be patient with yourself. It's a journey, not a race.
Well said.
So what's one small step you can take today to break free from an emotional trap? Maybe it's setting that worry timer, writing down your accomplishments, or breaking down a big task into smaller steps. Remember, even small actions can make a big difference. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into emotional traps. We'll see you next time